Just like that. Well, yeah, that's hard to.
All right, we're going to try and get started on time here. We've got a great presentation by Koaw, but I want to leave plenty of time for us. I know everybody's going to have a lot of questions and everything, and then we also have some stuff to talk about Red State coming up. So, I don't see any brand new members here today, so no new member introductions. So, again, our guest speaker tonight is Koaw. I think a lot of us are familiar with his website, which is dedicated to sunfish identification and sunfish range maps and fishing tips. And I just speak for myself, that was kind of my go-to reference if I was looking to identify sunfish specifically, but he also has great pages on ESOC species and a lot of other stuff. So, Koaw, I'll turn it over to you. Let me stop my screen share real quick.
Yeah, quick question. Chris didn't give me a time slot, so I want to know how long you want me to speak for.
I mean, 30, 45 minutes plus about 15 for questions would be great. You don't have to go that long if you don't, have it.
What I prepared will fit in about that time slot.
Perfect.
So let me everyone, it's great to see you have such an active club. That's great. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so I thank you very much for inviting me here today. Just to double check that you can hear me right now.
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So I am Koaw of KNFS, Koaw Nature. As Brian said, my content is why you guys contacted me, because I've been a biologist for about a decade, and currently I'm working on a PhD in Southern Illinois in the Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences Department. So this is one of my favorite genera, and I've focused a lot of my efforts into this. And so we're going to be talking about the common sunfishes today. There are currently 15 species, and a lot of what I'm going to say. Oh, excuse me, you were saying something?
No.
Oh, okay. A lot of what I think there's just feedback, maybe.
Yeah, a little feedback.
Okay. So a lot of what I'm going to speak about today, I'm assuming you're anglers and that you already have a good familiarity with picking up fish, and I'm not going to start at the beginner level, basically. We're going to zoom through some stuff, but I'm going to clear up some stuff. And the cool thing is, in your region, if we go 100 miles around Baton Rouge, 11 of these 15 species exist. So that is really cool if you're a life lister and you like picking up diverse species. However, when it comes to our long ears here, the Gulf, the plains, and the long ear, there's going to be some headaches, and we'll talk about that. So our goal today is I'm just hoping that I can give you something to better help you understand how to ID common sunfishes. Chris had told me there's a lot of questions about bantam, so I'm going to focus a lot on bantam versus other species. I'm also going to focus pretty heavily on the dollar versus these other three long-ear complex species, as well as talking about the long-ear species here. And then at the end, I got a little hybrid talk, and we're just going to go over a bit of tips to narrow down identification. I'm going to show you how I do it. And I emphasize now, and as I always emphasize, this is very difficult to do. It requires a good knowledge of what all the species look like. And sometimes it's just not possible. So there's a lot to identifying a fish, and I don't want you to try and soak all that in. But when it comes to common sunfishes, there are 5 really good features to look at. The first one's the mouth. We all know about the mouth, but the size of this mouth, even the colors, patternation, can help us identify a common sunfish. The opercular flap, more easily called the ear flap. All the common sunfishes have these. The size, the length, the color on them, very good clues. The pectoral fin, These are kind of analogous to our arms. There's one on each side of the fish, but the length of this fin is really good clue. The dorsal fin, the second dorsal fin, this is the one with the soft rays. The colors and the patterns can have a good clue for us. And then the anal fin here, it can give us some good clues because there are 3 spines. And this is just a good way to differentiate this genus, the common sunfishes, versus some other genera in the family. So here we're just looking at 4 common sunfishes, and I've highlighted in yellow boxes their ear flaps because I just want you to quickly observe that there are some differences in the sizes, the shapes, the angle, the coloration. The bluegill, the only one without coloration all over that ear flap most of the time. These are just good things to notice, but the big emphasis I want to put on this doesn't work for most juveniles. So you have to really look at late juveniles, very late juveniles, subadults, and adults. But it's a great feature to look at on these larger specimens, more mature specimens. Here we have a close-up of one of the newly declared Gulf long-ear sunfish species. So this is a very long ear flap. We can tell it's bigger than the eye, but it's also important to recognize that it has colored edging. When I talk about colored edging on the ear flap, we can see it has mostly pale edging, but it can flare up with this yellowish, orangish, pinkish purple, and it's a great feature to look at. The green sunfish over here, we can sort of see the eye. It's a shorter ear flap, but they always have this kind of pale edging that has some color in there as well. And you want to notice that's not opaque. Really, the red ear sunfish is a species that has an opaque ear flap. Another feature that's really good to look at is the mouth size. And I've just shaded in here the maxillary bone. And if you were to draw an imaginary line straight up, you'd want to look to where it's intersecting the eye. And so the green sunfish has a large mouth in the common sunfishes. It's hitting the pupil if we drew that line up. We look at a bluegill. If we drew that line up, it's going to the front of the eye there. We would consider this a small mouth. So those are, it's a great feature to look at. On the bantam sunfish, it has a fairly large mouth. When we draw that line up, it hits the pupil. So even though we're talking about a couple millimeters here, this is a big feature to look at on these common sunfishes. The pectoral fin length is also a great feature to look at. Here we have a red spotted sunfish. If you were to bend this pectoral fin all the way forward, it wouldn't pass the front of the eye. And it's usually going to be between the anterior edge, that front edge, and between the front edge of the pupil. Whereas on a mature bluegill, that pectoral fin is always going to be bending past the eye or very, very close to it. On juvenile bluegill, that fin will probably be going near the front of the eye. It gets a bit longer as they mature. There's a lot to look at here. I just want you to focus at the yellow boxes. We're comparing crappies. On the left, we have a black crappie. On the right, we have a common sunfish. This is an orange spotted sunfish. Common sunfishes have 3 anal spines, and I'll keep saying that because that's really important just to remember. Crappies are going to have 6 or 7. I remember one time I was fishing in this winter water in this pool, and I picked up 2 juveniles that were both whitewashed, and they looked very similar. And I just realized, it's really easy. Just feel the spines. If you feel 3, you're probably dealing with a common sunfish or something else. If there's more than 3, it's not a common sunfish. So it's a good way to put you down the right path of identification. And then we have our black basses. So the smallmouth bass, the Florida bass, the Alabama bass. There's actually a whole bunch of new black basses that I bet you're aware of that got recently split out in that genus. So these have longer bodies. We want to notice this because in the yellow boxes here, both of these groups, the black basses and the common sunfishes, have 3 anal spines. So that's not going to be helpful. But just eyeballing the body depth, this measurement, if you were to turn that into the standard length, on the black basses, this body depth would fit in here less than 30%. On the common sunfishes, it's going to be greater than that. And I chose the warmouth for this illustration because the warmouth has one of the longest bodies of all the common sunfishes. And then another thing which you're well aware of, but I always like to remind people of, is that the same species can have different appearances. Just as every human looks a little bit different, we're all still the same species. This isn't to scale. This is probably a 3-inch bluegill. These are probably 6 to 9-inch bluegill. But this is a juvenile. a late stage juvenile. We notice that the ear flap isn't fully developed yet. It's really bland, doesn't have much coloration. Even the dark dorsal blotch, which is characteristic of the bluegill, isn't fully developed and bright yet. There's also a difference between this female and the males. In biology, we call this sexual dimorphism. So this phenotypic variation, or just the differences in what they look like, it happens between the females and the males. And even within males, these are both parental males. We can tell by the red breast here, darker pelvic fins almost, even though this female appears to have some dark fins. They can have different appearances. And if you notice this right here, this bump on the nape or the forehead, we can tell that this is an older, large parental male in the prime of the breeding season. Bluegill males, the old ones, the males get this big bump on their head. And we see that in long-ear sunfish complex species as well. So I want to talk about the bantam sunfish right now. And these are actually some bantam that I filmed in one of my research sites in Illinois. And a great feature to look on bantam sunfish is that dark dorsal blotch in their second dorsal fin. It is really bright on juveniles, even late juveniles and subadults. Up top here, we have northern starhead top minnow swimming around. So where I'm at in southern Illinois, the bantam is very rare. It's only in a few spots. Where you guys are, there is a lot more opportunity to get bantam. And I stress right here on the size, most adult bantam are between 2 to 3 inches. It would be absolutely rare to be finding bantam bigger than 4 inches in the wild. So if you're holding a fish bigger than 4 inches that you know is a common sunfish, it's probably not a bantam sunfish. So size immediately is a good tell. Also, where you are fishing is a good tell. The bantam is pretty much exclusively going to be found in slow waters with lots of vegetation. So we're talking sloughs, swamp-like habitats, oxbows, even some possibly flooded marshes. They can handle slightly salty water, not brackish water, but very slightly salty water. Here we have a subadult bantam sunfish. This is a 1.4-inch specimen. It's just about to be sexually mature. A great feature to notice is that mouth is large. If we drew that imaginary line up, it would hit the pupil. Another great feature to notice is that on the subadults, that dark dorsal blotch is still pretty dark, and there's red and orange in that second dorsal fin. Here's a 3-inch specimen I pulled from one of my research hauls. This is a full-grown male. This is 3 inches, I believe, and we notice that dark dorsal blotch is fading, but it's still present, and there's still some red and orange around there. We also notice that the mouth is large, our two big tells right away. But another thing, when you're actually physically holding these fish, you will notice that they are very thick for how long they are. If you were holding a bluegill of this same length, it would be 2/3 the thickness. It would look like a thin fish. The bluegill and the red-spotted sunfish, they're some thick fish. Another good feature to look at is the lateral line. That's this line right here. And we notice that it's incomplete on bantam sunfish. And this is just a sensory network on the fish that contains pores that have sensory cells called neuromasts that detect vibrations in the water. And so looking for an incomplete lateral line, spots where it doesn't have continuation, is great. On the right here, we have a red-spotted sunfish. And last year when I was in Louisiana, I actually picked this up. I got this specimen from Indian Creek Reservoir, I believe. And we noticed that it has a complete lateral line. It's continuous. There's no breaks in it. On the bantam here, we see that it kind of continues, and then we start seeing some gaps. That's a good tell. Another thing to notice that the bantam has the very large mouth, whereas a red spotted, that mouth isn't going to be hitting the pupil if we drew that line up. But really the best thing, if you're looking at, these are both mature specimens and they're about 3 inches, 3.5 inches. If you're looking at a red spotted, there will be an iridescent blue bowl at the bottom of the eye and even at the top. And this is only present on the spotted sunfish, which isn't in your range, and the red spotted sunfish. So it's just a great tell. Here's that same specimen. I'm just highlighting that sometimes, depending on your lighting, it might not be visible. And if the fish is looking down completely, you won't be able to see it. So you want to make sure that you don't overlook that if the fish is looking down. Another good thing to look at on the bantam is it has a short pectoral fin. It's rounded and it's short. So that can be a quick tell against a bluegill or a red ear sunfish. Here are two specimens I pulled from the same dip net haul. On the left, we have a bantam sunfish, and both of these are just over an inch in length. The juvenile bantam have this wonderfully dark black blotch, like I showed you in that GIF, that little video. Oop. Right there. And on bluegill, it's not fully developed yet usually, or on this specimen, it's not even there at all. But the other thing to look at, I immediately could see and tell, is the mouth is pretty big. And so even on the juveniles, when this line might just be hitting the pupil or might be before it, it's bigger than the bluegill, where we can tell it's not even hitting the anterior edge of the eye. So that's just a quick way to tell juvenile bantam from the other common lepimids. Another thing to notice is that the juvenile bantams still maintain that deep, sort of robust, thicker body. Here's a drawing I threw up a few years ago. These are about 2 to 3 inch specimens. This is a late stage bluegill. We see the dark dorsal blotch is developing. The bantam has that dark dorsal blotch, but it has red and orange. Bluegill will not have red and orange in there. Small mouth, large mouth. The pectoral fin is long and pointed on the bluegill, which here on these late stage juveniles, it goes to the eye, whereas on the bantam, it remains short. And you guys, I threw this one in because you guys also have flyer in your region. Now, an adult flyer is pretty easy to tell apart from the common sunfishes, but the juveniles actually look fairly similar to young bantam because they both have this dark dorsal blotch. But the big easy tell is just go count the anal spines. 3 anal spines on the bantam. There's going to be about 7 or 8 on that flyer. Another easy visual tell is to look at these bands. Now, this one's been in the tank for a minute or so, so it started losing its color. But if you immediately pull up these juvenile flyer, they typically have these dark, thick bands flared up. It's really visually quite easy to tell. Also, the flyer have this teardrop extending onto the from the operculum chinish area right there, whereas on common sunfishes, you don't see that teardrop continuing. So let's get into the dollar sunfish compared against the long ear species. And I'm going to treat these 3, when I'm saying long ear, I'm referring to all 3 of these because it wasn't up until a couple years ago that all of these were considered a long ear sunfish anyways, because they all have very similar features. And the dollar is very similar to the long ear as well. So even though long ear has been recorded around 9 inches, a little bit bigger, they rarely exceed 6 inches. I've only caught one between 6 and 7 inches. Everything else I've gotten is below that. But dollar usually stay below 4 inches. So it's a smaller fish in general, and that's something good to keep in mind. But really, there are 3 features on a dollar that we want to look out for that typically are on the dollar that aren't on the long ear. And I say usually because this is like a 95% thing. It's not a 100% thing, which is why you want to look at multiple features. The first one is looking at the mouth. And we'll look closer at these features to give you a better look. Dollar sunfish don't typically have color on their mouth that extends all the way, whereas on the long ear, they do have this blue streaking that kind of continues along the entirety of the lip. Secondly, if we look at the ear flap, we see that blue dot. Dollar sunfish typically have blue spots of iridescence on the back mid-end of their ear flap, where the long ear do not. Finally, dollar typically have this apparent reddish orange coloration along the entirety of their lateral line or in some parts of it. And it's a bit hard to see here, so that's why I'll show some better photos. So if we look at the mouth on the left, we have a dollar. We see there's blue coloration right there, but it kind of stops on each side. We see that stop. On the long ear, it continues along the entirety of that upper lip to the other side. And so this is normally seen, not 100% of the time, but it's typical. Oop. Here we have $1 on both sides. On this dollar sunfish, that orange spotting is continuing, and it's apparently different from the rest of the patterning along the entire lateral line. On this dollar sunfish, it's only showing up as spots in these two spots along this portion of the lateral line, but those are distinct characteristics of dollar compared to long ear. Here is a dollar that I pulled up in Louisiana in that exact same spot. It was cohabitating with that red spotted sunfish. But we see that it has spots on this side. Actually, on the other side of this fish, it didn't have those spots on that ear flap. So you always want to check both sides. We see some distinct orange popping up on this lateral line that kind of appear off of the main patterning. So here we have 2 of 3 of our dollar characteristics. And then finally, we can see a distinct gap in the coloration on the upper lip there. Ooh, excuse me. So right here, we're hitting 3 for 3 on dollar unique features. So this is a beautiful little dollar I picked up in Louisiana. Habitat-wise, you're more than likely to find dollar in sand, mud bottom, wetlands, oxbows, sloughs, etc. And you're more than likely to find the long ear species in reservoirs and lakes. However, there's plenty of habitat where they have shared habitat or can be in the same habitat, similar habitat, headwaters of streams, rivers, etc. So that's just a partial clue. It's about using multiple features. And anything smaller than 1.5 inches, even maybe 2 inches on telling these species apart, it'd be a nightmare. I would just say don't bother doing it unless you're willing to maybe do a genetic test, or you want to wait for a bunch of these features to appear that we went over that aren't going to appear on these small juveniles.
We're usually fishing with flies, so we don't do too much dip netting. We don't.
So here we have the. I'm sorry. Can you guys not hear me?
Yeah, no, we can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was chiming in to say that we usually fish with flies, and so we catch small ones, but usually 2 inches would be like the smallest, I would say.
Okay, all right. Well, I figured there might be some microfishers, super microfishers in there. I just turned down my volume a bit because there was the feedback.
Okay.
Getting into the plains long ear, the long ear, and the Gulf long ear. So we need to remember that a study came out about 4 years ago that used genetic evidence and zoogeography to differentiate and say, hey, these should be different species. A couple of years ago, some authorities said, okay, we'll allow it. However, these were all considered the same species, and they don't have any meristic, which are countable features like the number of spines, or morphometric, which are measurements like head length. They have no features that can 100% definitively tell these species apart now. So what you have to depend on is range. But let me show you an example here. This is probably, I got their data and I pulled this up for you. This is probably the most differentiating aspect between a plains long ear and these other two species. If we look at each one of these dots, we can just think of that as a measurement on a fish. And this is opercular flap angle. So we're talking about the ear flap and how angled it is. We can see visually that the plains long ear can have, more often has less of an angle on their ear flap. And so that's great and all, and that's a trend. However, if we're thinking about this, a differentiating feature, there's no way you'd be able to tell this apart from the other ones because there's so much overlap. So you really have to look at range. But you guys, I can understand why you have a headache in this region. And so I've pulled their genetic data of what they know, and I've presented some maps for you, and it can only be approximated. And I'd love to see more genetic data, but it's expensive and time consuming. And after this study came out, I don't see any university willing to throw money at this. Maybe you could convince your state to do it, but it's unlikely. But I threw together some maps to maybe help you kind of narrow in on where you want to go if you want to be pure about what you're catching. So this is the Pearl Basin. And this is only Gulf long ear appeared in here, and this makes sense because this is the South Atlantic Gulf Basin where the lower Mississippi is going to be over here. We can pretty much say with good confidence that these are going to be Gulf long ear, and anything eastward will definitely be a Gulf long ear if it's within the long ear complex. And you got to forgive me on my pronunciation. This is the Lake Pontchartrain Basin. This has got some of New Orleans in it. We can be pretty confident this is all Gulf long ear. I've been looking at some stuff and I've been talking to some biologists, and there are definitely people releasing fish into these lower areas. So I hope they're releasing the Gulf long ear species. And then we get up to the Big Black Homachito Basin, only long ear. So we're at Lepimus megalotus here. The long ear sunfish has been appearing here. We start seeing some anomalies along the Mississippi. I'll talk a bit on this one more, but I'd be pretty confident that these are all going to be long ear sunfish if I was catching a fish. But then we get into immediately around Baton Rouge in the Lake Maurepas Basin. This is in the lower Mississippi Basin as well. We see a long ear population. We also see in that northern part of the range a Gulf long ear population. So if I were angling, I'd be a little uncertain maybe in this area of what I was pulling up. Anything lower, closer to Baton Rouge, eastward, I'd be very confident that it's probably a Gulf long ear.
There are some, if you mind backing up one spot there, Koaw.
Yeah.
So
One more here?
forward, one more forward, where you had the red circle.
Oh,
So right around that red circle, some of that stuff drains over into the Mississippi, and then a little bit south or closer to Baton Rouge, it starts draining into the Maurepas. I mean, would that be if we were going to have a rule for our club saying, okay, if it drains directly into the Mississippi, we're going to call it a long ear. If it drains to the Maurepas, we'll call it a Gulf. I mean, is that?
I mean,
Call line somewhere.
I think you would have to sit down and vote on what you do because I'm giving you literally the genetics that we have. And if I were actually trying to be a purist, anything here along the Mississippi, down even in New Orleans, I would say they could be introgressed specimens.
Gotcha.
I would bet dollars to donuts if we pulled genetics on them. They would.
I didn't know if we could make a if we could say, okay, this drains into the Mississippi directly versus this drains into the Lake Maurepas, then out through the Pontchartrain, if that would be, I'm saying that I think that makes sense to me and we should do that, but.
Yeah, I can also send you this PowerPoint with these because I made these graphs for you guys on this, so I can give you it and you can vote on it.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll talk a bit more on the uncertainty here, but yeah, I figured you're purists on what you want to do, and this is why it's going to be hard in your area. So we have 6 basins down here that have no genetic data. And when I went through and making this, I was talking with some biologists who were thinking on this as well. We were kind of considering that it would be Gulf long ear, Plains long ear. But as over the years, I've seen a lot more observations in this area of this complex. And in my opinion, it might be Plains long ear and it might be long ear. And so what we really need are some genetics to be done. So I would love to see if they actually hopped over the Sabine River at one point and populated that. You know, we don't know what happened 10,000 years ago. We don't know what humans may have transferred those over. We don't know if it was a natural thing. We really need genetic evidence. So that's the uncertainty that I got to give you for that region. On this one here, even though this is a Plains long ear sighting, this was supposedly an introduction that the biologist knew who introduced it to a closed system. However, we don't know if that escaped into the Mississippi or where they actually pulled that from, because we do see in this northern part of the Mississippi, this is a Plains long ear sunfish mixed with northern sunfish DNA. It's a totally half and half introgress specimen. So right along the Mississippi, it's really unknown what you're going to be pulling. So I kind of was sad that I have to give you and tell you have more questions than answers in your region, but at the same time, I hope that this at least can help you figure out how you want to arrange your other bit. And I'll take more questions on that at the end if you want. Let's get into hybrid common sunfishes. So hybrids, this genus loves to hybridize. It's theoretically all of them can hybridize with one another. And so I say this is difficult because you really have to have a familiarity with what each species can look like and its variant forms to know what a hybrid could look like. And there are fish ID books are great for that. I love my bird book. iNaturalist I find is just great for the casual angler because I feel that about 98-ish% of the identifications on there are correct. You can get range of what local people are seeing. And then I also have what I've created that's free to view that I point out features and actually show how to measure or how to, say what feature actually looks like the guidebooks are talking about. So that's a must before you get started on hybrid ID. And the next thing is for you guys, you have to make a list of all the possible species that could be in the area. And it doesn't have to be a 100-mile radius, but that's what I like to start with. You could start with a 25-mile radius around where you got your possible hybrid. And I emphasize always that you should get photos because if you're not going to keep the fish, you're not going to remember. So photo 1 should just be a good lateral shot. That's the side of the fish. Photo 2 should be a good shot of that ear flap because that can always have so many clues. The next one is a shot of the gill rakers. And this is really, you just lift the operculum, get a shot of that first gill arch and kind of the middle rakers there. And I've made a video on how to do that, but it's pretty simple. The pectoral fin's not so important, getting it splayed out like this, but it can be if you want to get nitpicky. And then a good close-up shot of the head because we want to look at that mouth and the eye and also the coloring and patternation on the head. So this is actually a fish I pulled up this morning. When I was doing my trip through Louisiana last year, I also went to Texas. I didn't get any hybrids in Louisiana, but I got this one in Texas. So this morning I did a little workup of how I went to go ID this hybrid. So we're going to go through it together. So this is in Longview, Texas. So I basically just figured out what possible parent species could be there. And I immediately recognized this was a hybrid because the patterning doesn't match any pure species. It just seems off. And I just have that because I've looked at a lot of fish. And so that's kind of where you need to be like, am I dealing with a hybrid or not? Again, those resources can kind of help you figure out if it's hybrid or not. So the first thing I like to do when I'm looking at a possible hybrid is look at the length of the pectoral fin. And we notice here, this pectoral fin, if we bent it forward, completely passes the eye. So that immediately, of the species I pulled up, tells me that I could only possibly be dealing with a red ear sunfish or a bluegill because the pumpkin seed, which also has long pectoral fin, is not in that region. So I know one of my parent species is one of these two species. Then I'm looking at the opercular flap. It is long. It's bigger than the eye. It's also thick. So right there, of the possible species in your region, it's telling me that's either a plains long-eared sunfish or a red-breast sunfish. I guess that's not your region. That's a Texas region. And it could also possibly be a dollar sunfish. Although dollar sunfish don't typically get super, super long ear flaps, they can. They have, I'd say, on average, medium ear flaps. So we can't rule out a dollar. So just by knowing what species it has to be, we can eliminate what species it's not because none of those features are in the bantam. We don't have a long pectoral fin or a long ear flap in any of these species I've put an X on. So we're left with 5 species. And so the next thing I want to do is look at the gill rakers. And of our 5 remaining species, only one of these has thin and long gill rakers. So on our left, I have a photo of the gill rakers, which I'm glad I took, which I always take out of habit. So that's our hybrid that we're looking at. For reference, this is a plains long-eared sunfish caught from the same water. These are short, thick rakers. On our hybrid, we have thin and long rakers, and they're actually not intermediate like I thought they would be. They're pretty long still. So what this is telling me is that this red ear sunfish, which typically has shorter, thicker rakers because they primarily eat gastropods like snails, they don't need the thin rakers. It can't be that parent. I've got a long pectoral fin and long gill raker, so I have to have a bluegill as one of my parent species. So we know the bluegill is the parent species, long pectoral fin, long gill rakers. We need to figure out what the other parent species is. So the next thing I want to look at, besides having this long, thick ear flap, I see there's colored edging on it. And usually on these hybrids, the colored edging, it's going to be all messed up. It's going to be, we see this is like a 0.5 millimeter thickness, which is thinner than what it would be on a pure. And it also isn't continuing around, so it's not even complete. But the fact that there's color on the back end, when we know a bluegill, if we look at a bluegill, they don't have any color on their ear flap. This is telling me that the red-breast sunfish, which doesn't have any color on the back of the ear flap and typically only has this whitish, bluish color, I have some red in there. I'm kicking out the red-breast sunfish. Now we're left with the Plains long-ear sunfish or the dollar sunfish. So what I want to do now is immediately look for, okay, I'm dealing with a hard thing. I've got a dollar versus a Plains long-ear. I know there aren't many dollar in this region, but that actually could be more incentive for a dollar to hybridize because they're having a hard time finding mates. So just based off of abundance, I wouldn't say that's a good thing to ever go off of. So we keep in mind our size. Yeah, our hybrid, it's probably 5 inches or so. So it's bigger than 4 inches, but that doesn't tell us much because bluegill can get pretty big and that could make up for it. So what I want to really do is go look at those 3 features we talked about: the mouth coloration, the spotting on the ear flap, and spots in the lateral line. So on our hybrid, yeah, we have orange spotting. However, it doesn't ever appear to be different from what the normal patterning is. And I know this is almost might not be obvious. I've just looked at so many thousands of fishes that it's apparent to me that this patterning is continuing rather than sort of being distinct. I wouldn't say that it's appearing. Also, there's no spots on the lateral line here. I mean, the opercular flap, I apologize. We also need to look at both sides of the fish. I'm not sorry about this. I forgot some boxes. I'm not seeing any colors that seem off in this. This spot had me thinking a bit, but I think that's just the actual lateral line pore kind of giving me some color. So I'm not seeing any dollar sunfish spotting on the operculum either. But what I am noticing is that there's blue streaking that's trying to continue across this lip here. Now, bluegill from here to here will always have a little white spot usually. So that could be bluegill and long ear and dollar. We could attribute that to anything. But it's this right here, this little thing that we're noticing is telling me, okay, that is saying Plains long ear to me. So what I kind of summed up, and I know I did this briefly because time is kind of our enemy on these presentations. A bluegill is one parent species because of that long pectoral fin, those long gill rakers. The Plains long ear, I'm most likely leaning towards over dollar because of the very long, thick ear flap with color. The lip blue streaking was really what set it apart from the dollar. And then I didn't see any other apparent dollar features that, you know, they may or may not have been there. So this is why I can't be 100% on this identification, but I can be pretty confident. So I know it's kind of brief and I had to run through some things, but I will take questions.
Anybody? Go Yeah, so I think a lot of us have tried unsuccessfully to catch a bantam sunfish. Have you caught them on hook and line frequently or with any?
If you want the trick to catching a bantam sunfish, it's going to require the utmost patience. So you're going to want to move in during when the waters hit breeding season. So for you, that's probably going to start April, May, Yeah, probably April, maybe even a little earlier in April. That's when the bigger specimens start coming ashore. So you're really going to want to target the 3 to 4 inchers. If there are 3 to 4 inchers, you're more likely to get the 2 to 3 inchers. So what you're looking at is you want a size 8, nothing bigger than a size 18 hook. Go small, and it's patience. What I literally do is I camp out. I find a spot where I think they might be, and you might not visually see them, but they're going to be in vegetation. They are. If you can find lily pads, something that looks like there's cover for them to hide in, you can just sit there. And I just put on a little piece of plastic. It's not even a real one. Like, what is that? I don't know, just a little fake worm. That's what I put on, about maybe 2 millimeters. I even slice it in half so it's got a wiggle. And I can sit at a spot and I will sit there for 5 minutes straight, just slightly jigging it because they are spookish fish. And then it comes and they will hit. So it's really these small species. I used to fish for a very similar species on the East Coast within the Neacanthus, blue spotted sunfish. They're pretty much the same thing to fish for. It's patience, and you can't spook them. I don't see you having success with them on a fly rod because unless you're willing to sift through a hell of a lot of vegetation or maybe be able to work your baits. I don't fly fish anymore, so that's more your expertise. I'm just telling you my tactic is sort of what a heron would do: patience and wait.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, we do fish like that sometimes where we just kind of dip our fly just in the water in a hole in vegetation. So, and I've heard, is there any truth to the thing that any sunfish will spawn like during a full moon? I mean, is there any truth to that? Like they might be coming in shallower during a certain time of the month, or is it just water temperature?
Uh, what's I can't say I've read that. Um, I will say what dictates spawning of common sunfishes the most is temperature and photo period. So photo period refers to, we have our 12-hour light cycle or 14, etc. So I could see a full moon perhaps eliciting more mating behaviors because they have more light. And maybe there's observation, but I can't say I've read anything in the literature about that speeding up their mating cycle.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had shown those slides earlier with the Gulf long ear and then the other variant. Were there watersheds where there was no introgression of either?
Yeah. So the within Louisiana, at least.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So within that, the Pearl Basin, I believe it was which touches on the kind of the top of the boot. I guess if you're looking at Louisiana like a boot, that had pure Gulf long ear, and then in the Homachito, the Big Black Homachito Basin, that was pure long ear. At least the genetics showed that. And then what was in the Lake Pontchartrain? Am I saying that right? Yeah, that showed pure Gulf. Granted, they only had one specimen. So I think your club is great, and if you could just convince your biologists in your state, just be like, hey, we'll give you the fish if you just run the DNA on them. Like this is how science gets done. I mean, if you can find a biologist willing to write a little grant, if your state has money for it, they would gladly take your fish sample. Like you wouldn't have to send them a whole fish, just like a scale or something. I'd love to do it, except I'm so swamped with my own research right now.
They don't do research at wildlife and fisheries. LSU would be a more likely candidate for that.
Yeah, if you could convince one of the professors there to take on a grad student to do that, that'd be cool.
Anybody else in the room with questions?
Yeah, hey, Koa. Chris here. Sorry, I wasn't there in person tonight, but made sure I logged in. I was curious, you mentioned the one intergrade between a northern along the Mississippi. Is that the only northern genetics that showed up kind of in the southern Mississippi, or do you see a trend down with that where there's a little bit of introgression?
Uh, in your region down south, that was the most southern northern sunfish DNA to show up. Now, keep in mind, we had a glaciation event, like 10,000 years ago. So a lot of the fish got pushed down pretty much to where southern Illinois, right where I'm at, and that ended up pushing down a bunch of fish. And so we saw probably a lot of genetic swapping at that time. And so when the glaciers receded, the populations that were up there the northern didn't do well once the temperatures went back up. So we still see some remnants, though, of that DNA in some populations. And I think I highlighted what that study found on my website within my map there. Does that answer your question?
Yep, absolutely. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me, too.
I have one more. So a lot of times in a pond situation, we'll catch plenty of red ear and bluegill out in the open water. But then if you fish more, vegetation near the margins, you might start catching some small other type of either red spotted or little warmouth or orange spotted. I mean, is that just the bigger fish just bully the little ones, or are they into the edges, or are they just specialized more for that type of habitat?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's definitely habitat niche separation. That's what we call it. So I'm just thinking of Indian Creek Reservoir. Any of you fish that?
Yep.
So I was fishing, I was camping on a spot, and I was in this back bay, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to get long ear here because it looked like no water flow was happening. It was really shallow. It was muddy. It was almost anoxic. But the dollar and the red spotted, I put the camera under the water. They were loving it. They were everywhere. No long ear near there. And so you can see, even though they're the same species or same genus, the common sunfishes, they each can kind of specialize differently. And so if I had gone a little bit further, walked 100 yards to where it started getting a little deeper, a little bit more flow, I probably would have started picking up the long ear, more of the bluegill, probably more red ear. So yeah, they're specializing. And then with bluegill and red ear, if you suddenly get into a pond system and you've been catching red ear sunfish for years, and then the farmer or whoever owns it's like, I'm going to go kill all the plants, I don't like them, you're probably going to see those red ear sunfish go away because they eat snails, and the snails depend on the plants. And so that actually happens up here a lot, where that specialization, the farmers forget about it, get rid of their plants, and then they lose a species they love catching. Because the red ear sunfish, as I bet many of you know, get the biggest out of all the common sunfishes. They're a fun fight on light line. So yeah, you're definitely right, Brian. It's that habitat separation. Each one of them does pretty well in
that. Do they all hybridize together?
Theoretically, yes, all of them can. We've only got evidence, at least published evidence of a good amount of them, but I haven't been on INAT in a while, but I've been looking, and it looks like more and more types of hybrids. I'd love to verify them and publish this one day, but it really looks like any one of them can hybridize with any one of them. And keep in mind that, though, sometimes it depends on the male, who's the male parent and who's the female parent, because sometimes, say, I forgot one specifically, if it's like a green sunfish female with some other species male, they might all die. But if you switched it, then they might actually have survivable offspring. And then what can get more frustrating is that those hybrids, they're not completely sterile. They can still reproduce, although they have their gametes or their eggs or sperm are usually deformed, and so they're not as successful. Their natural mating rituals are off, so they're not really attracting mates as well as the pure species, but it's still possible to get hybrid DNA going into other lineages. So Hybrids are fun and complicated.
So you could have, in theory, a pond that's just full of mutts.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely could.
Well, I think that's it. Thanks, Koa. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
And,
no, I appreciate you having me.
get into that research project and let you know if we can make any traction. That's a
Yeah.
great idea. Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
I think
All right. I will fishing reports. I mean, I know the weather's starting to warm up. It wasn't